And now we turn to Daf Yud Tesam Beis. But the diak is Hamakirin, had the Anshe Gol been very familiar and have constant encounter with Trumas Halishka, then Asurim. Now, what do you mean Asurim? How can you say it's also? You're telling me because Makirin es Trumas Halishka, the theoretical possibility. That's not simple. There's also Trumas Goren. So they give Trumas Goren no less than in any other part of the land of Israel. And you're going to tell me Asurim based on your diak of Rabbi Yehuda. It means that in the Suffolk, we don't know what kavana they had, whether being matvis in Trumas Goren, and therefore it's a dover asur, and therefore the hatfas is not chal, the neder is mutter, or they're being matvis in Trumas Halishka, which is a dover another. So you don't know what to do. So apparently Rabbi Yehuda is implying that the principle that applies here is Safek Nedarim Lahachmir. So if Rabbi Yehuda holds that a person is machnis atzmo l'safek, and therefore Safek Nedarim Lahachmir, that's against what he says in the Brisa, that Naziris is not chal misafek. Omar Rava says, you know what, Rabbi Yehuda holds Adam machnis atzmo l'safek, and Stam Nedarim Lahachmir. And that's what we prove from our Mishnah with regard to Safek Nedarim, that we're going to be machnis. You'll ask the question about Nazirus when he said a Tanai, and we don't know if the Tanai was fulfilled or not, and Rabbi Yehuda was Mekil, Gabi Kri. Kasavar kol speko chomor mivade loma ayel nafshi l'saf. Now we have an interesting paradox, a halachic paradox, about two categories of Nazirus. One is Nazir Vade, the other is Nazir Safek. And you and I would have said intuitively that we're always more lenient and makil with regard to a suffix than a vadai. But here's a case where dafka the kula comes out in a case of vadai. And what's that? The ilu gabi nazir vadai megaleach maybe korban v'necha. But al sveika lo motzi megaleach. The halacha is that a nazir, when he completes his nazirus, he is magdish a korban, and then he does giluach. He brings the korban. He's allowed to eat the korban, and as a result of bringing the korban, he now is allowed to drink wine, so that the korban is the completion, the makav patish of his nazirus, and his matish dias yayin. But in the case of a suffix nazir, he doesn't have the ability to bring the korban. That's because of the halacha of Chulin Lazara. We don't know whether in fact he's a Nazir. And on the side that he's not a Nazir, this animal that he's bringing as a korban, he has to actually bring three different korbanos, is Chulin Lazara. So we're not going to allow him to bring the korban. It's a Safek Isur Kares. And as a result, in a case of Safek, he cannot bring the korban. If he can't bring the korban, he can't be Mutter and Shtiyas Yayin. So it comes out that in a case of Safek Nazirus, we have to be more machmer than in Vada. So a person doesn't want his Nazirus to be Chalmi Safek in such a way that he'll never ever be able to drink wine for the rest of his life. But in a case of Stam Nedarim in general, where for sure a Safek is more Mekil, is more lenient than a Vada, then Rabbi Yehuda would concede that the neder would be chal misafek because nedarim are chal misafek. There's no extra chumrah in a safek neder than there is in a vaday neder. It's only in a case of the zirus where we have that very paradoxical phenomenon. Amalei Rav Huna bar Yehuda l'Rava. Rav Huda is not happy with Rava's answer. Namely, that the reason for Rabbi Yehuda that the Nazir is not a Nazir misafek because he'll have, in the case of a Safek, a bigger chumrah. He won't be able to bring his korban, therefore he can't drink wine. That's not always true. That depends upon what kind of Nazirus he took upon himself as a Nazir Liolam. Amar, according to your logic, Rava, if he would have declared already Nazir Liolam, if the Kri has Mea Kur, I want to accept upon myself Nazirusly Olam, and now it got stolen, it got lost, and we don't know whether it was a kur and the Tanai was fulfilled. What should be the din? After all, the Brisa says that in the case of Hareini Nazir Almanas, that there should be Me'akur. It says that any Stam Nazir would apply, which seems to, a Stam is not qualified. So it means even if whether he took a Stam Nazirus for Shloshim Yom, or he said, I want to be a Nazir Liolam, or Nazir Shimshon, I will soon see. So Bishleim, I understand in the case of Stam Nazir, therefore the suffix puts him into a very difficult chumrah, in which he'll never ever be able to drink wine. So therefore the Nazir is not Chal B'Safek. But why would the Nazirus be Chal in the case of a Nazir Olam, and we have a suffix whether there's a kur or not? A Nazir Olam, even if he was a Nazir Vade, would never ever be able to drink wine. And we never were able to be Megalech his sorrows. So it's not that the suffix is more chomer than the Vade. The Vade has the same identical chumrah as the suffix, albeit for two different reasons. But in the case of Nazir Liolam, he will never ever be able to exit from his state of Nazirus. And nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda holds that he's not a Nazir in suffix. It must be that he's holding that Ein Daito a suffix, even in a case where a suffix is more kal than a vada. So we're left with the original stira, the original contradiction from Rabbi Yehuda, the way we would die in the case of Golil, when he was matvis the stam truma, that if Anshe Golil would be makirim trumas halishka, then the neder would be chal misafek. And yet in the case of the zirus of im yesh me'akur, Rabbi Yehuda holds it's not chal misafek. So Rabbi responds to Rav Huna bar Yehuda, Nazir Olam Nami Speko Chomer Livada. Even in the case of Nazir Olam, there's going to be a situation where suffix is more chomer than vada, that paradox. Not because of shtiyas yayin, but for a different reason. And this is interesting. And for this, we really have to learn Masechet Nazir, Nazirus. The halacha is that I guess we'll say the Torah was makil with regard to a Nazir Olam. Why? Because a Nazir Olam would never ever be allowed to cut his hair. And at a certain point in his life, his hair becomes unmanageable. It's too heavy on his head. And we're going to allow him to do a tisporis b'shinui. This reminds me by sheer association of the laws of Chol HaMoed, where there are certain malachos that we're going to be matir b'shinui if it's a davar avud. It could be even in Yontif itself. Forget about Chol HaMoed. The only problem I have is, Rabbi Rhodes, maybe you could help me with this. This I mamish couldn't figure out. A shinui is meaningful with regard to the context of meleches machshavas osra Torah. But in Nazir, the Isur Tisporis has nothing to do with meleches machshavas. But in any event, getting back to the Gemara, it says hifnit siyaru make him. Betar, we're going to allow to use a tar instead of a misparayim. So he's not doing it kedarko. He's cutting his hair b'shinui. Now, after a Nazir cuts his hair, then he brings his karbanos. And in fact, there are three categories of karbanos. There's a chatos, ola, and shlamim, who may be shalosh behemos. And these behemos are brought to Torah's vade, otherwise it'd be something kul lazara. The ilu speko lo. If he was a suffix nazir liolam, then there's no way we could allow him to bring his karbanos, because it's always going to be a suffix kul lazara on the side that he's not a nazir. So if he's makabel on himself Nazirus Olam, he doesn't want to be makabel on himself Nazirus Misafek, because he'll never have an opportunity to cut his hair and to bring his karbanos. So we see that even in a case of Nazir Olam, we have a very paradoxical situation where Safek is more chomer than Vadai. So now Rav Huna is going to ask an additional kasha on Rava's answer. Here's another case. And in this case, we won't be able to have the luxury of Rava's answer to defend himself. Omar Reni Nazir Shimshon. So he makes a t'nai that if in this kri, this pile of tvua, this mea kurim, I should become a nazir shimshon. Now, again, the kri is lost. What are you going to tell me in this case? Are you going to say that Rabbi Yehuda concedes that he's a nazir himself? Because here there's no chumrah of suffix more than badai. Because whether it's a suffix or a badai, he doesn't cut his hair at all. And he has the status of a Nazir Olam, but that's very difficult to say that. And the Brisa does not make any distinction and seems to be assuming as an absolute all-inclusive rule that even in the case of Nazir Shimshon, the Nazirs would not be Chal Misafek according to Rabbi Yehuda. And why is that so? You must draw the conclusion that Rabbi Yehuda holds that a person does not include Safek in his Kabbalah, in his Dvarim. Even in a case where there's no Chumrah in the Safek above and beyond the Bada. And that's against Rava. And once again, we come back full swing to our original question, that in our Mishnah, Matvis Tam Truma is, and we don't know whether he meant Trumas Halishka or Trumas Goren, then it's Chal Misafek. So Rava responds to Rav Huda's kasha, Nazir Shimshalo Tanya. The Brisa is not interested in the case of Nazir Shimshon. That is removed from the suffix. Because as we said before, in the case of Nazir Shimshon, he can never ever cut his hair, even B'shinui. And there's no difference between suffix and Vada. And now Rav Huda rejects this answer of Rava. Amalei, okay, maybe you'll push it into the Brisa and say the Brisa is talking about other kinds of Nazirs, but not Nazir Shimshon. But for Omar, what are you going to do with the statement of Rav Ada bar Ava, who brought a Brisa, Tanya Nazir Shimshon, that on that very halacha, they added explicitly Nazir Shimshon, that even in Nazir Shimshon, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that ain't other machnis atzmol is suffix, even though there's no chumrah in suffix above and beyond vada. So at this point, Rava is against, his back is against the wall. He rescinds his original answer. Omolei Tanya. What can I say? If you found such a brisa, I can't reconcile the brisa without Mishnah. And the brisa clearly indicates that according to Rabbi Yehuda, Stam Naziris is Lahach. So now Rav Ashi comes to the fore, and he wants to respond to this question from the brisa, which is explicit that even in a Nazir Shimshon, Rav Ashi Omar, Rav Yehuda actually holds that only in Safek Chomer Mibadeh, only in those cases, those rare cases where the Safek is more Chomer, ain't on the Makdas Atzmon Safek. But in the general case, where we could be more Mekil, or at least we should say that this status of Safek is equal to that of a Vadai, Rabbi Yehuda's Moder, that we have to go L'chumra, like in the case of Truma. The Brisa says that even in Nazir Shimshon, that Brisa that says that Nazir Shimshon, where Suffolk is, and Suffolk has the same status of Vadai, and Rabbi Yehuda is Mekil. No. That's not Rabbi Yehuda himself. That's Rabbi Yehuda, the name of his Rebbe. Rabbi Yehuda, Mishum Rabbi Tarfon he. But he himself, Leilo Smirle. Rabbi Tarfon is of the opinion that you're only makabel naziris bevadai, ba'ofen bar, when it's absolutely clear. Rabbi Yehuda never accepted the sheet of Rabbi Tarfon. The Sanya we learned in a brisa, and this is brought down in the Gemara Nazir Daf and Beis. There are two people who are going down a road, and somebody's coming towards them. And one of these two people say, Hareini Nazir, if that person himself that's coming towards us is a Nazir. His friend says the exact opposite. Hareini Nazir Eino Oso Ploni. If that person is not a Nazir. And Rabbi Yehuda says in the name Rabbi Tarfon, Ein echad me'em Nazir, l'fi shelo nitna Naziris el hafla. Hafla means you have to be absolutely definite and certain about your Kabbalah's Naziris, without any T'nai at all whatsoever. And that's based on the Pasuk in Nasa, in the Parsha of Nazir. It says, Ish o Isha ki Yafli. And Yafli means Vadai, Borah. Tzara Kabbalah Brura. So if he's accepting upon his Naziris and he's not sure whether or not this Naziris be Chal, then in fact the Naziris is not Chal. So if you have a T'nai in your Naziris, and you don't know if that so-and-so is going to be a Nazir or not, then the Naziris is not Chal. That's Rabbi Tarfon's Shita, that when a person Makabel Naziris, he has to be definite. So if he decides that it all depends on whether this Kriya has Meya Kurim or not, in such a case, the Naziris is not Chal. But that's not the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda would say that a person is Makabel Naziris B'Safek. And now the Gemara raises the following objection to Rav Ashi. If the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda in that he's not a Nazir, the way Rabbi Yehuda interpreted Rabbi Tarfon is the lack of hafla, is my area shenignav ho'of, and forget about whether it was lost or not, whether we can check and decide whether it was me'akom. Forget about it. The very fact that he was makabel naziris without knowing, he hadn't yet measured out the me'akur in the creed, that itself means that there's no hafla and there's no naziris, because he didn't have a kabbalah brura umuchletes. So the Gemara answers, Ella, we're going to have to assume, according to Rav Ashi, even if it wasn't stolen, and even if it wasn't lost, he's not a nazir, according to Rav Yehuda in the Shita of Rabbi Tarfon. The Brisa adds the condition that Nignavo Ovda, that's Lo Diacha Kocha de Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon, who disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, and certainly in a case where the Tanai was Makuyam, Rabbi Shimon would certainly, and that's clear, that's Pashut, would validate the Nazirus. But even in a case where Afagav the Nigdav Osha Avad, and we can never ever clarify whether or not the Tanai was fulfilled, nevertheless, Kasavar, I'll inshi nafshe misveka. Rabbi Shimon holds a person is the Naziris is chal misavek. A person is machnas asmal savek. And his das was that the Naziris would be chal. If indeed there's me'akur, we'll never know the answer to that question, but it's a Naziris something, and he was makabel in his das was that the Naziris should be chal, even though we'll never know for sure whether his Tanai was makuyah. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says in the Mishnah, Stam Truma b'Yehuda is Asura, the Golil Muteres, because the Amshi Gol don't have an encounter with the Lishka, the Trumas al Lishka. And we had the diuk earlier, which Gemara now reiterates, that Ha Makirin, if in Golil they would be familiar with Trumas al Lishka, now we have a suffix. We don't know if they meant Trumas Goren or Trumas al Lishka, Asura. That fasa, there was a stamach fasa, it wasn't specified, of truma in Golil would now be awesome. Even though it's possible that he meant truma sagoren, which would mean that there's no fasa, it's a dover awesome. Alma says the Gemara, what do we see, what do we prove here as far as Rabbi Yehuda is concerned? That's fekel chumra. So the Gemara raises the following question, a Masechet. Let's look at the end of Rabbi Yehuda's statement, and he says that in the continuation of his statement, he says, "Stam charom b'Yehuda mutarim b'gol asurim she'enan shigol makiris charmei kohanim." So if a person says charomim, well, we have no doubt in Golil that he has in mind Chermei Gavoa. Chermei Gavoa is a Davar Nodar, and therefore the Hatfos is Chal. But let's again be medayik from the words of Rabbi Yehuda in the Sefer. Ha Makirin. If let's say Anshe Golil would have constant access and encounters with Chermei Kohanim, which the Davar Asur, then we should assume that in such a case, Mutarin, we have a suffix, and we don't know whether he had kavanah for a cherem gavoa or a cherem of kohanim. His alma, we see that's feka l'kula. That if you have a suffix in the neder, then the neder is not chal, and we're going to be making. And yet in the Reisha, in the case of stam truma v'golil, it seems that Rabbi Yehuda was saying suffix l'chumra. As we medayik from the fact that if in golil they would have been, how should I say, have constant encounters with Trumas Halishka, then the neder would be chal. So what is Rabbi Yehuda's shita? Is a neder chal misofik or is it not? And we have here a stira between two parts of the Mishnah. Rabbi Seifa, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Tzadiki. The Seifa, from which we medayik that stam charomim lahakil, that is not the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. We thought it was a hemshech of Rabbi Yehuda. No, that reflects the sheet of Lazar Rabbi Tzaddik, who rejects Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds something midor lahachmir, and therefore stam charom Yehuda suri. And that means even though the makirim charmei kohanim, which as we said before is the davar asur, it's possible, therefore, that they had kavanah for karmei kohanim, nevertheless suffix lahachmir. That's Rabbi Yehuda's sheet. The Seif, on the other hand, of this Mishnah, of stam charom Yehuda mutarim, that reflects the sheet of Rabbi Lazar of Tzaddik. And he holds ein on the machnis atzmo with suffix nedarim, suffix charomim lahakil. And therefore, stam charomim only in golil asur, because eino makirim chermei kohanim, which is davar asur. And therefore, if in golil they say cherem for sure, we assume the kavanah was chermei gavo, which is the davar another, and it's asur. But if they would recognize or have constant exposure to chermei kohanim, then it'd be mutar, because suffix is mutar, and that's the shita of Rabbi Elazar ber Tzaddik. The Sanya, where do we learn about this machlokes? In a brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Sam Truma b'Yehuda Sura, Avol b'Golil Muteres. That's the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Elazar ber Tzaddik Omer Stam Charomim Lahakil, Stam Charom b'Golil Asurim. So again, Rabbi Yehuda in this brisa is mekil in the case of Golil, and he's machmer in the case of Yehuda. And we would die from Rabbi Yehuda that in Gol he would also be machmer if they were makirim truma stam, truma salish. But Rabbi Lazar says that stam charom begol asurim in general, straight across the board. But that's actually the final conclusion here of this Gemara. He says here in the footnote, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Tzaddik, so v'she'eino l'machnis atzmo l'sofen. V'daito rak al masha mashma b'lishon v'vados. Right, which means stam charomim b'golil asurim only because it's badai. And in Golil, when they have in mind charomim, they have in mind charmei gavo, which is the davar another. But had it been a suffix, then Eino Chinami would be Mekil. That's Rabbi Elazar of Tzaddik's sheet. But Rabbi Yehuda's sheet is that Stam L'Kumra, and that's the end of our Omud for today. So B'li tomorrow we pick up the new Mishnah on Daf Kaf Omid Al. So I wish you a great day.